Honoring his campaign promises, Donald Trump closes the door to refugees. He argues to keep the United States safe. But what are the consequences, and will his order encourage other countries to follow suit? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. The Syrian conflict is described by some as the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. Almost 6 years of war has killed and displaced millions. Syrians have sought refuge in other countries, but the welcome has varied. Some European countries have welcomed thousands of refugees, but others have built fences to keep them out. And the US is closing its door too. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order suspending America's refugee program for 4 months. Muslims fleeing the slaughter in Syria will be blocked from entering the United States. Christians are excluded from Trump's order. Banning Muslims was one of his election campaign promises. So is he making good on that?
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Donald Trump's executive order is not limited to Syrians. Refugees and migrants from other countries are also restricted, including Iraqis, Iranians, Sudanese, Libyans, Somalis, and Yemenis. Trump says he is aiming to protect America.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here. We want to ensure that we are not admitting into our country the very threats our soldiers are fighting overseas. We only want to admit those into our country who will support our country and love deeply our people.
An estimated 11 million Syrians have fled their homes since the war began 6 years ago. The International Organization for Migration says 12,500 Syrian refugees were resettled in the United States last year. Less than 2,000 were admitted 2 years ago. In comparison, neighboring Canada welcomed close to 40,000 Syrians in the past 2 years. Let's now talk to our guest joining us from Amman, Jordan, Mouin Rabbani. He is the co-editor of Jadaliyya online magazine. Mouin previously served as political advisor to the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria. In Geneva, Leonard Doyle, spokesperson for the International Organization for Migration, and in Greenville, South Carolina, Brad Thomas. He's the author of the book, The Trump Factor. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. Brad Thomas this. Mr. Brad, shutting the doors on refugees, is it going to be a radical shift in US foreign policy, or was it just dictated by purely security concerns?
No, I believe it's just based on security concerns only. Remember, we've got extreme terrorism, and the way that Donald Trump is combating the extreme terrorism is through extreme vetting. This is not your normal vetting process that we've seen in the U.S. For a long, long time. We're talking about extreme vetting, and that's really what this all amounts to. It's 120 days for him to really try to crack down and try, for a plan to get in place. Again, for the safety of this country, absolutely.
Mouin, you've listened to what Mr. Thomas was basically saying, the extreme vetting as a way to make America a safer place. You're based in Jordan. Tell us a little bit about the reaction from the millions of people living in the Middle East.
Well, I don't know that much about the local reaction. I guess I would start by pointing out that the U.S. already has some of the most stringent vetting procedures on the planet. And sure, you can throw around silly terms like extreme vetting, but it would be helpful to actually define it beyond just uttering it as a slogan. I think what's going on here, first, if we talk specifically, for example, about Syrian refugees, we see that the numbers applying for residency in the United States is actually quite small, not only compared to neighboring countries like Canada, but even more so if we compare it to, for example, Europe and countries here in the region. I think what's actually going on is a process of demonizing and scapegoating the weakest and most helpless among us, whether refugees from war and conflict in the Middle East.
Let me include Mr. Leonard Doyle. Leonard, you work for the International Organization for Migration. How concerned are you about the new executive orders that were signed that were specifically targeting immigration and refugees?
Well, obviously, we have concerns for the individuals who are already in the pipeline and were effectively have been cleared through security and had their health checks, and were expecting to travel at any moment to the US. There's about 16,000 of those around the world from different countries. So it's great personal hardship for them and great uncertainty. And this is the opportunity for other countries to step forward, because let's remember that given that you have a change of administration and a new concern about security, which any administration is entitled to have, there are lots of countries in the world who are not generous towards the resettlement of refugees. The countries around the conflict countries, of course, have been extraordinarily generous, but the United States kind of stands alone, really, when you look at resettlement worldwide. So there's plenty of opportunities to point fingers at other countries, I would think.
Brad, we've seen some angry reaction in the United States of America. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer basically saying that tears are running down the cheeks of the Statue of Liberty. Are we going to see some opposition building momentum against these orders, or you just believe this is going to be just a temporary angry reaction?
Well, again, over 50% of the people did not vote for Donald Trump. But those people that did vote for Donald Trump, and I am one of those, full disclosure, I think what we're seeing with Donald Trump, and we've seen this since the day he, over a week now, he's starting to deliver on his campaign promises. So I've attended at least a dozen rallies over the last year where we've talked about extreme vetting. He's talked about the wall. He's talked about a number of these issues that really are appealing to the voters, people who voted for Donald Trump. So I think that's really what I'm seeing this week. This is just another example of his delivering his promise, his campaign promise. And again, it's all about security of this country. I mean, I live in this country. I do feel very unsafe in this country. And frankly, I'm glad to see Donald Trump taking these initiatives, these bold initiatives. He's a tough leader. And I think what the other countries have to recognize is we're not dealing with a weak president right now. Donald Trump is coming out strong. And I think these other countries need to recognize that he is a tough leader. And that's really the bottom line. And that's what I'm seeing throughout the week. And I think we're going to see more and more of this.
But yes, Mouin, this is a president who is definitely going to be, in a way or another, spending a lot of time tackling issues in the Middle East. What kind of reaction that this decision sent to the political establishment in the Middle East? Is he someone who is definitely going to further cooperate, or are we going to see further clash?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, that as Donald Trump is playing to the gallery with these kinds of statements, organizations like ISIS are uncorking the proverbial bottle of champagne because he's playing right into their narrative. The other thing is, it's curious that if you look at the countries on the list issued by Trump yesterday, it really seems to be limited to countries that the U.S. has bombed and invaded and impoverished, and seems to exclude those with which Trump and the United States has business relationships, even if the statistics show that the countries on the list really don't need, there's no evidentiary basis for including them on there, whereas there are other states who, according to the criteria that were announced yesterday, should be on there. Again, we can pretend this is all about security, but it's really about xenophobia and playing to the gallery and demonizing and scapegoating
Speaking of
the weakest and most helpless among us.
Speaking of the statistics, There's much talk about the plight of Syrian refugees. Let's take a look at where some are trying to rebuild their lives. Turkey hosts 2.7 million Syrian refugees, more than any other country. Around 1 million are in Lebanon, that's around 1 in 5 of the population. Another million have requested asylum in Europe. More than 6 million Syrians are internally displaced. Mr. Leonard Doyle, your organization and many other aid agencies are trying to cope with the massive number of people fleeing their homes because of the conflicts, particularly in Syria. How are we going to plan your next step given the new situation now? A country, a huge country, shutting the door to refugees.
I believe it's important to remember that the refugees who are in the surrounding countries are different from those who've been chosen for resettlement. I mean, resettlement will always be a tiny amount, maybe 1%, and it's designed to help the most vulnerable cases. It's designed to help those people who are actually being systematically killed and murdered because of their particular religion or because of their beliefs or whatever it may be. So to lump them in with the broader refugee population, I think does a disservice to the viewers. We need to focus on the extraordinary, history of generosity of the United States towards resettling refugees. Now, this is perfectly within the rights of any administration to have a review or a reset. What we hope for is that it will return, as it did after 9/11, when the numbers came back and when different opinions were expressed. And finally, we had a situation where last year we had in the order of 100,000 refugees resettled from around the world. So I think it's important just to put it in perspective and not to confuse resettlement with refugees in general.
All right, so putting things into perspective, and let me address this with Brad Thomas. The president said that he's going to give priority to Christians over other refugees, but isn't there a risk of showing that this is a discriminatory act because both the Muslims and the Christians fleeing the conflict are people who are being persecuted and fleeing for their own safety? So why would you just pick one, not the other?
Sure. Well, again, I did support Donald Trump, and I am a Christian. I think one of the reasons Donald Trump, won this election was because of his Christian values, and also Mike Pence, the vice president of this country, same thing. Both run on Christian values. So I think that was really what Donald Trump was trying to say, is that my interests. I know, again, I voted for Donald Trump. My interests are in line with his because I know that he and Pence run on the same Christian values that I do. And part of those Christian values is that we love our Muslim neighbors. That's part of our beliefs, as Christians. So, I don't think that Donald Trump is not at all saying, there's no hatred directed towards the Muslim group. I think what's directed is boils down to, again, what we said earlier is safety. That's the only thing that Donald Trump is doing, and it's 120 days. So it's not a long-term, it's not a long-term fix that we're talking about. He's going to take 120 days. Now, look, the way I look at it, again, I live in the United States of America, and I love this country. But this country is not safe, and my children don't feel safe in this country. So I think what he's doing, he's going to put some locks on the door, if you will, and he's going to stop some people from coming in for a temporary period of time until we can get our arms around this situation, because it has reached a level where it is extreme. And I think Donald Trump, it's appropriate to use these words extreme, because that's what it is. And so that's really how I would answer that question.
All right, so I got your point. Let me go to Mouin Rabbani. Mouin, we're talking...
I have to interject here. I mean, the reason the United States is not safe is not because it has a record of accepting refugees from wars and conflicts and poverty. The reason is because any maniac can go to any gun store, buy a semi-automatic weapon, and shoot up the closest school or mall or whatever. I mean, that's the reason that your country is increasingly unsafe. Donald Trump is an expression of Christian values. If that's true, I'm the Pope. I mean, come on, you can throw out these silly slogans, but there actually has to be meaning behind them. Now, as far as what Mr. Doyle was saying, yes, as a matter of principle, every country has the right to establish its own criteria for accepting or rejecting refugees for resettlement, as long as it's consistent with international law. And here I have to say that it appears that the U.S. Congress, so the American system itself, has issued laws that it's illegal to reject applications for resettlement purely on the basis of national origin.
Let's look.
So
let's have a look at the. Mouin, let's just for a second have a look at the bigger picture, and let me address this with Leonard Doyle. We're talking about potential for more people to flee their homes in North Africa and in the Middle East, and their destination, their top destination, is Europe. But aren't you concerned, Mr. Doyle, that this new executive order might boost other anti-immigration parties in Europe to follow suit?
Well, it's a possibility, but there's an equal possibility that it will get them to finally open their doors and open their wallets and support refugee resettlement, which is actually what's needed. There has been a lot of generosity on the part of Germany and indeed Canada, especially towards Syrian refugees. But as for the rest, it's been modest to say the least. So I think maybe there's a wake-up call here. The point is we need places where those who are assessed to be vulnerable have somewhere safe to go. Where they go ultimately isn't that important. It is important that there be neutrality and that people be assessed on the persecution they're facing, not their beliefs or religion. And that's obviously a concern, and the United Nations would stand by that principle. But I think let's just remember that there are many, many countries in the world which have the capacity to absorb refugees and resettle them, and perhaps we should be asking them a little bit more.
You're basically referring to many Middle Eastern countries, particularly the Gulf countries, who have been criticized for not opening their doors for the refugees.
Well, not only. I mean, there's the entire continent of Latin America. You've got a resurgent Asia. You've got vast areas of the world which are doing economically extraordinarily well, and where there is great diversity in the populations, where refugees would surely feel welcome and settle. So, I mean, it is important to remember, as criticism is hurled around the place, that the United States has been extraordinarily generous and practically alone in accepting the large numbers of refugees for resettlement. So allow them the opportunity to review the security situation. There is a big, political support for resettlement in the US. Let this allow itself to play out and see what comes out in the wash. And I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't a little bit like after 9/11, when after a certain period of 120 days in this case, there are reviews and we return to a more even keel.
Let me go back to...
I have to
briefly, if you don't mind,
express a reservation to
Go
that.
ahead.
While one could in principle agree with what Mr. Doyle has just said, there is kind of an anomaly when the United States illegally invades a country like Iraq, systematically dismantles a state, effectively destroys the country, is responsible for the civil war and rise of extremist movements and so on that have arisen there, and then says, actually, no, those fleeing the catastrophe that we've created will not have a right to come to our country. I mean, there has to be some kind of moral equation here. And the irony is now that even those who have collaborated with the American occupation are now, in principle, excluded from any opportunity for resettlement in the United States. So, it's fine to make these general statements of principle, but one also has to look at the reality. The U.S. is not a spectator to what's happened in the Middle East.
No, but
certainly in
are
Iraq,
many of
if
the
we look at
countries
Yemen,
which,
for example,
accompanied
today.
it. I mean, this is a kind of a foolish argument, I'm sorry.
Well, China did not invade Iraq. China is not bombing Yemen. So as a matter of principle, I don't disagree with you.
I have to step in there, guys. Let me go to Brad Thomas. Brad, I mean, you've listened to the whole debate, and you've argued that you defend the notion that safety, security of the United States of America comes first. However, there are those who say that there is an issue of security which is there, but it is undermining the issue of multiculturalism, which has prevailed in the Western democracies for decades, and therefore that just could one day disappear. Because as you can see, at the same time, we have an anti-Muslim sentiment which is at the rise.
You know, again, I think this goes back to what the bottom line here is we have a new president. He's been in the office for just a week. And I think what we're seeing here is he is a tough president.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that? I'm sorry?
What a week it's been.
Yeah, so, well, again, Donald Trump, we're seeing for this last week, Donald Trump has been a tough president. He's a tough negotiator. Our stock exchange, American stocks have rallied since Donald Trump has been in office. We're going to see continued strength, not only in terms of the economy, but in terms of the wealth of this country. The reason Donald Trump ran on this ticket was to create the wealth of this country. So this really, it really boils down to strength. And Donald Trump is flexing his financial, his muscle, and he's making these again, profound statements. But again, this is a 120-day period. I think a lot of people are overreacting with the sentiment here. I mean, this is a 120-day period. It's not forever. These people aren't going to be banned. He's not saying this is
I see your point. So you say this is
forever.
A precautionary measure that is temporary, and then there will be a review of the whole thing. But Mr. Leonard, what would be your next strategy? Are you going to try to reach out to the Americans, the Europeans, and tell them, you know what, we need to put a freeze on those decisions to be able to cope with the growing number of people who are seeking refuge, or basically doing this for a legitimate reason? They are fleeing persecution.
I think the important thing is, you know, putting the politics aside and putting the rhetoric aside, and we've heard plenty of that in the last couple of minutes. The important thing is the individual merit of every case, whether they are Syrians, whether they're from Burma, whether they're from Congo, where 16,000 refugees were accepted by the United States in 2016. The important thing is to examine every case on its merits and assess it on its merits away from the heat of the sort of politics and polemics we're hearing today. It's not about who invaded Iraq 15 years ago. It's not about pointing blame. It's about protecting people and ensuring that their individual rights are protected. Okay. And I think that's possibly a healthier way to look at it. And then just see if there is a temporary if there's a temporary stop at the moment in the United States, what other countries can step forward and take these 16,000 unfortunate people who are now in a state of limbo and give them an opportunity? That's where I think would be a more productive way to look at things. I see
your point. We have less than 2 minutes, and I have 2 questions, so I'll ask you to be very brief. Mouin Rabbani, do you think that Trump will adjust as president as he tries to reach out to the other world?
You know, this is a 120-day period, and the way these things usually begin is you put out kind of a feeler or temporary measure, and you see how much you can get away with it, how much resistance you encounter, and if you succeed, then you extend it for another 120 days, you put in some more stringent conditions, then you expand it. And I think Mr. Doyle is fully aware of this, even if it is a case that the United States is now threatening to cut its assistance to international organizations such as his. So I appreciate his hesitancy. But this is,
one last question.
We can't get around the fact that this is an expression of Trump's xenophobic, Islamophobic
got your
agenda.
Point. I got
There's
your
no
point.
way
Very
getting around
briefly
that.
to Brad Thomas, do you think that with Trump we'll see a change in style and substance at the same time compared to Barack Obama?
No, I really don't. I think well, yes, compared to Barack Obama, yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, again, Donald Trump is a tough negotiator. He understands how to create wealth of this country. And I think, you know, it's the golden rule, okay? In investing or politics, however you want to say it, he who has the gold makes the rules. The United States of America is the gold standard of the world. And Donald Trump is going to protect this gold standard. And this is just one measure he's taking, 120 days, to protect the safety of this country. That's it. We're going to protect this country. This is the gold standard.
We'll have to give it some time and see how it resonates among millions of people all over the world. Mr. Mouin Rabbani, Mr. Leonard Doyle, and Mr. Brad Thomas, thank you very much indeed for your time. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.